What are the biggest things Utah needs to fix if they want to make a run at the Big 12 title and have a successful second half of the 2024 season? That's what we're breaking down on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube, and we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media. We can follow our show on X at Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. You can place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by UteZone's Pearce. Hope you all had a wonderful bye week, enjoyed some college football games, or just whatever you did. If you got away from college football, whatever helped you deal with and decompress from what we had to go through last Saturday, watching that disappointing performance from Utah against Arizona. Now we're in game week again. It's a shorter game week too, Ethan, as we're going to get Arizona State coming to town later this Friday. So we'll talk about it. This week's a little bit different for Utah, but first want to talk about the biggest things I feel like Utah needs to fix if they want to make a run at the Big 12 title. And I think the number one thing for me, because this is the truth, look, Utah can lose one more game and still make the Big 12 title, but you want a one-loss team is not going to miss the Big 12 title. A two-loss Big 12 team, that is where the tiebreakers could hurt Utah. Just like in years past, Utah beat Washington and Oregon back in 22 on some strange tiebreakers that allowed the Utes into the Pac-12 championship game. So that's the kind of stuff that Utah needs to avoid. So for me, the biggest thing that Utah needs to fix is they need Cam Rising back. I mean, simply put, I do not think this team, there is a world that they can make it with Isaac Wilson. It's not a probable one, and Cam Rising is the best quarterback that Utah has still. If he's in the game, I feel confident in this Utah offense. This Utah offense is different. They scored on 8 of the 11 drives he's been in. The biggest thing that needs to be fixed is obviously the offensive production. That improves mightily when Bad Moon Rising is back under center.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think that, we've seen the full experience of a true freshman quarterback with Isaac Wilson in the last couple of weeks, right? Some really good moments and some really bad moments. And he looked great, and he did good enough to get him a win against Oklahoma State. And then last week, it was a pretty disappointing performance there against Arizona. Missed some easy throws in the red zone, especially at the start of the game. They went for it a couple of times on fourth down and didn't get there. You can question the play calling. You can question, all sorts of stuff. But I do think that if they have Cam Rising there, he scores them, at least a touchdown extra, maybe two, and they potentially win that game. So they do need Cam back, and I think he will be back. I know that it's really frustrating, seeing the injury updates. Will he, won't he? Is he going to play? Is he going to not play? That's just how Utah likes to do it lately, apparently.
Good old Uncle Kyle, right? He loves to keep us waiting, and I understand partially why, because of the game ship, but it's obviously just been a frustrating saga. As someone who supports this team, wants them to do well, as anyone who listens to the show, you invest a lot of time in supporting Utah football. So that's where it's just frustrating each week if you don't know if that guy's going to be there. So that's number one for Utah. The biggest thing they need to fix, just needed to fix if they want to win the Big 12. And hopefully that's something that the rest during the bye week was able to help him to. But I also have a 1B to my 1A being Cam Rising. The 1B is if Cam Rising is hurt, you need to create better game plans to maximize Isaac Wilson's skill. Utah always says when you come to their program, you will become them. We will not become you. That is true when it comes to culture. When it comes to maximizing your offense, you need to craft the best one that makes Isaac Wilson look stellar. And I think now Andy Ludwig has had 4 games. We've seen Isaac Wilson play in all 4. Or 5, to figure out what the best version of this Utah offense is with Isaac Wilson at the helm. What are the things he does well? Number one thing, right? Like we're taking out the QB runs. It's not something he does well. If the defense makes a mistake and there's a chance for him to scramble, he did that a few times against Arizona. I like that, but continue to see, okay, how can we make life easier on him? I talked about on last week's show, I want more motion in this offense. I want more screen passes, I think is another thing. Mekhi Bernard's a talented receiving back outside of just the physical running back he is. And that's where I feel like this Utah team, if we do not get to see Cam Rising over the bye week and even leading into the Arizona State game, you have to figure out how to maximize this team with Isaac Wilson, because I do not think they've always put him in a chance to succeed.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that it was kind of tough sledding for them against Arizona because first I want to give credit to the defensive backs for the Wildcats. I think that a lot of them played a really good game. There was a lot of batted down passes and just getting physical at the point of the catch, right? I know that you can argue about a lot of missed PI calls. That was a big hot topic during the game, and that's always going to be the case, right? The refs have an influence on the game. That's just how it is. But I think that Dorian Singer obviously played great, and there was a few catches that he could have had extra, right? I think Wilson really put him in a good spot. I don't think Wilson necessarily even played like a bad game. I think it was just kind of a lot of weird things adding up that put Utah kind of behind the eight ball, and it just wasn't their night. But I do think you're right. You can kind of get Mekhi Bernard involved a little bit more in the passing game. He's a real weapon there. If you're going to be like running on 4th and short, maybe draw up a more creative play call than just, hey, we're going to run Mike Mitchell right up the middle. Like, let's just think of something different. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, because especially on that run you're talking about, it's like, I know Utah, the philosophy is we're going to get 2 yards. We're more physical than you. Well, the problem is the defensive line got the stalemate against your offensive line, and there was an unblocked guy off the edge. So that's where it doesn't matter if you're bigger and stronger and more physical. If you're not able to get that initial push, which is hard to do in those goal line and short yardage situations, then you're not setting yourself up for success at all. But yeah, I agree. I thought Wilson didn't play a bad game overall. I thought he had a bad second half, but I think in the first half where there were a lot of positive things, I mean, he was really marching them down the field, and then Utah stalled in the red zone. That's on everyone. I mean, I remember Wilson and Mekhi, both of them had runs and Mekhi's fantastic, but even he's missed holes that have cost us Utah team at times. Wilson, the same thing, guys not getting open, and the play calling is another thing too. So, and we mentioned it a little bit with my number 2 about like just maximizing Isaac Wilson. I should say that includes getting him the reps in practice needed so that he can reach those improvements. The other thing though too is just Andy Ludwig as an offensive coordinator continuing to put this Utah team in a position to succeed, because we've only seen limited amounts of time with Cam Rising, but when it's been really good. Isaac, it's been up and down. So I just think it's also on Andy to adapt. It's kind of like what we talked about with the last one, but that would be my clear second one outside of the quarterback whole dilemma. Is just also Andy Ludwig has to be better. We have to be more creative in the red zone. You have to figure out a way to maximize your guys even better. This Utah team has tons of talented offensive personnel, and it's hard to feed everyone the ball, but I feel like Andy Ludwig can still find better ways to distribute it. Part of that's on Isaac and whoever's under center, but also part of that's on the offensive coordinator to spotlight those individuals and elevate their games. And that's where I hope he's taken the bye week to reflect on, because he's had some really good games. The start of the game was awesome. There were some things against Utah State when Utah got rolling there. They've been the Utah State. I mean, I know it's Southern Utah, but like everything Utah was doing, it worked fantastically. So this offense has looked good under Andy Ludwig. He's a really good offensive coordinator, but he's coming off a bad performance, and he's had the bye week now to evaluate it. He's got to get his play calling in order if this Utah team's going to reach their goals.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like such a momentum thing for the Utes, and especially on offense, where it's like if they're rolling and everything is working and things look good and they can kind of open up the playbook and let whoever's playing quarterback just run free and hit the open guys in stride, they look really good for stretches, right? And then there's times where, like this most recent game, and there's a game every season that you can point to like this, where they just don't look like they know what they're doing. They just stall out from the beginning. The offense is just completely uncreative. The defense looks completely prepared for everything they're going to throw at them. And Utah just can kind of stall out occasionally. And that's happened a number of times with this team. Not enough to, really impede their season goals, because they've been really good these last couple of years. But there was a game against Oregon State last year that comes to mind. There was a game against the Ducks last year where or was that 2 years ago? It all blends together. Yeah. But sometimes Utah just doesn't show up. And it just kind of seemed like that was what happened to him this most recent game. The good news for Ute fans is that they do tend to bounce back. So we'll see what they're made of after this bye week. But it was just an interesting game. I don't really know what else to say.
So frustrating too, though, Ethan, is like, because you're right. It felt like there were stretches in that game where things just weren't going Utah's ways and guys weren't performing. They weren't stepping up in those spots and they weren't showing up when Utah needed them to. But that's what also I look back and I'm like, man, if you just convert in the red zone early, we don't have these conversations. And that's what makes that game so frustrating and why I am not like this, some people like the season's over, doom and gloom. You're always going to get that portion of any fan base in college football that's going to abandon hope at this first sign of real adversity that comes with a loss. But the truth is when you look back at that game and go, okay, Noah Fafita made a lot of really good plays and really good throws. And if the Utah offense was even just a little bit better, they very well could have won that game late. So this is this area where I still feel like this Utah team's in a good spot, even if they do have some other things they still need to fix if they want to accomplish their goals this fall. Those goals and the other things they need to fix is what we are going to be talking about when this show comes back in one moment. But first, I want to take an opportunity to tell you all about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Sports are back, and it's glorious. We got the MLB playoffs. We got college football. We have NFL. I mean, we just have football, right? Football is what we all love. You listen to the show, you love football. And we like the MLB playoffs too, but football is football, and football is here. We did not get any Utah action this week, but now, look, they're coming up against Arizona State. You can head over to FanDuel if you want to get on the action there. How about some of the other biggest games across the Big 12? There's a massive Big 10 showdown, Ohio State and Oregon. I can't wait to see how that one's going to shake out. And so many big-time NFL matchups each and every week that you can head over and find on FanDuel today, because FanDuel is the best place for your sports betting needs. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, so you can get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com to look at all of the games and odds today. All right, Ethan, I talked about the biggest things I feel like Utah needs to fix. I have a couple other I want to get to, but I do want to be a nice host and ask you, my friend, what are the biggest things, or maybe the biggest that we haven't discussed yet, that you think Utah needs to fix?
I mean, it's kind of a cop-out, but I think it's just health. It's just getting everybody healthy. I mean, a lot's been made of Cam Rising, but I think that they're missing a lot of big playmakers on the defensive side of the ball. There's been some kind of mysteries with Karene Reid's injury, with Conor O'Toole's injury. They've missed a couple of weeks there. So I think just getting those guys back in there and kind of fortifying their defensive backs, especially with Karene getting back in there and the leader that he is for this team, I think could really, really help them. And it's not like they've even been particularly bad on defense these last couple of weeks, but I think that there is even another level that they can get to where they can kind of force a few more 3-and-outs, force teams to punt a little bit more often, rather than like letting them kind of get into field goal range. And I know Noah Fafita and Ted McMillan are NFL players and they're going to be in the NFL, but I think that they could have gotten the Wildcats off the field a little bit more in this game. So
I agree. Two things. Number one, absolutely where I was going to go next. The overall health of this team is literally the next thing on my notes. Second, I'm going to rant a little bit because you mentioned the mysteries surrounding Utah injury. What a crazy concept, right? There's something we've never heard of that before, like a saga of not knowing when a player is going to return. I appreciate that Kyle's kind enough to let us know when there are season-ending injuries, but here's the thing. The Big 10 and SEC have injury reports now. I think the Big 12, I just think college football as a whole should absolutely have injury reports. And some of you may be thinking, well, we don't need, it's the private thing for the team. We don't need to know like that. That's for them and not for us. Maybe that was the case in the past, but I do feel like something's changed now in the world of college football. We are now supporting, not me individually. I'm not saying I'm sending NIL checks to Utah, but the fans are now supporting the program with NIL. So I believe they are at least entitled to knowing the week of a game if a guy is questionable or a game time decision. And I know we've been having fun with game time decisions and Cam Rising lately, but I do believe this is something where it gets out of control. Is there really that much of a difference of not knowing if Conor O'Toole or Karene Reid are going to play? Maybe slightly, but I don't think it's enough that it really tips the scales anyway. So I feel like we should absolutely have an injury report in college football. I feel like with the time that fans dedicate, it's not that much to want him to know if it's questionable questionable. And especially now when you're asking them to donate to your program. So Ethan, I just feel like injury reports should absolutely be a part of college football, just like in the NFL. And we also haven't even talked about one of the most massive implications, the amount of the gambling world, right? There's so much money now being wagered on this that I still can't believe it hasn't been, because that affects the gambling lines massively.
And I think it is going to happen. The fact that those two big conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, do have the injury report. I think that it's going to be coming probably to the entirety of college football here within the next couple of years. I know that, Kyle Whittingham loves the gamesmanship, and they're not going to say. I truly wonder, if these things actually are game time decisions, if they're actually saying, hey, let's let this guy go warm up and see how he feels and see if he can play. But when it happens with the same player every week, that's when you start to be like, okay, if he's a game time decision now and he was a game time decision last week, then what happened all week? That's kind of the discrepancy there.
No, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the Cam Rising one, you guys can come at me in the comments if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure Kyle Whittingham said they figured out on Friday that he actually wasn't going to be able to go. So would it really be that morning if Pete Thamel it was we figured out before the game it was going to be Isaac again, but would it really be bad that day if it was 2 hours before kickoff? Oh, Cam Rising ruled out of the game for Utah. I just feel like that's kind of normal in the football world now. It's becoming in college and the NFL. But yeah, injury is absolutely a huge part of it. Outside of that, I think you just need to, for Utah's defense, one of the issues has been the tackling, and I think it's also been the inexperience of some guys, right? So Sione Fotu and Jonathan Hall are two guys that during the course of the first few weeks of the season, well, I guess not as much because Karene did get hurt during the Baylor game. We didn't see him again, but you spend so much time working on your starters during fall camp, like Karene, Reid, Lander Barton, making sure those guys are at their best level. The coaches, Colton Swan, can't spend as much time focused on the other guys. Still spends time, but not as much time. Jonathan Hall and Sione Fotu are two guys that have immense potential. They make nice plays, but they're also often the reason this team will give up a big play. They will miss a tackle. They will go in the wrong gap. And that's where I do think that they need to get these guys, just continue to help them grow and elevate. They have talent. I think they're going to be really good players. I wouldn't be surprised if next year those are Utah's two starting inside linebackers. We'll see what happens with Leavani Demuni's return and everything. But I think some of these guys, just continuing to get them more experience is a really key thing. The two guys I'm looking at are the linebackers right now, but we also mentioned this with Isaac in the importance of the practice reps and diving into film and going over those mistakes, because guys grow and get better over the season. We've already seen that from Wilson. Yeah, he took a step back against Arizona. It was the best secondary he's played so far. I believe he's going to have a bounce back game against Arizona State, and I believe those linebackers will as well if Karene Reid is not able to go. Yeah,
I mean, I think that it's interesting when you talk about freshmen and sophomores at this level, because it's really kind of a mixed bag. Because sometimes those guys just show up and they're players and they don't make a ton of mistakes and they can completely hold their own and they look like seniors out there. And sometimes it can be a little rough, right?
Yeah.
And that's only natural. That this is college athletics. These guys aren't pros. Mistakes are going to happen. But I just think it's interesting. And the other thing that I kind of wanted to bring up too, especially with Jonathan Hall and some of these other guys, we were kind of chatting before the show about changing positions and how Utah likes to do that and kind of, switch guys in the off season and kind of bring them up to speed at a new position. I think it's all well and good, but it can kind of, make the learning curve a little bit steeper for these guys. So I wonder just kind of what are your thoughts on that and the impact that can have?
I think sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think Jaquindon Jackson is a fantastic example of it working. He is one of the best running backs in college football this season. Teo Johnson has been a revelation for Utah in the secondary. But I'll look at someone like Miki Suguturaga. I just don't think the experiment with him as tight end ever really had worked out as well as they had hoped. Even last year, I know they tried to make him as blocking tight end, but he was better as a defensive end, in my opinion, too. So that's where this becomes always so interesting. Jonathan Hall is a guy who it is such a steep learning curve. I think it's tough to ask him to have to go in there. And I know Utah would probably be saying, well, our third linebacker was supposed to be Leavani Demuni. I get that, but I'm very curious to see with a guy like a Jonathan Hall, who I thought played really well at safety against Northwestern. I'm curious if this will end up long-term being the best move for him, because you make a great point, Ethan. It is just such a complicated thing. And I'd love to, some of you who follow some of the other college football programs out there, I'd love to know if this happens as much in your programs as it does at Utah. I mean, Utah just moved John Randall to a defensive back. Hunter Andrews is a running back now. So we see this happen all throughout the sport. It's one of the, or some examples throughout the sport. It feels like it happens more at Utah, but it's definitely one of those interesting things for sure. Something else that's interesting is the fact that Utah is playing on a shorter week. I want to talk about how that changes for this Utah football team, their preparation, as well as do a little bit of Utah basketball talk, since we're like a month away from the season getting underway. That's what we're going to be closing out today's episode of Locked On Utes with in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our fantastic friends at GameTime. GameTime is the place to go to make tickets buying even easier. GameTime is a new feature called Game Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite team faster and even easier. Filter out all the fluff to show you thousands of incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You can go to GameTime and it allows you to customize your offer, what you're looking for, right? You can look and get a panoramic view from your seat. You can also get your low price guarantee. You can let GameTime choose the seats for you. Game Picks is the place that makes it easier to save more on sports, concert, comedy, and theater events near you. Your purchase is also covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. It's capital LONC for Locked On in College, all caps, no space, or the first word in each letter is capitalized, no spaces. Terms to apply. Again, create that account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Ethan, really quick before we talk about Utah basketball, the bye week's here, or the bye week's gone now. So as we look to this game against Arizona State, it's going to be a weird one in Tempe on a Friday night. So it's a short week for Utah. So what changes? I don't think things change too drastically because they've had the bye week. So I think they've spent last week watching stuff about Arizona State, correcting the issues Utah has internally for sure, in terms of the things that they need to do better, tackling, all of that sort. Also, I didn't mention tackling as a big issue. I just felt like that was more of a one-off thing. This Utah team very rarely has back-to-back poor tackling performances. So I just don't expect that to plague them throughout the season. And obviously getting those guys healthy and back will be a major thing for this Utah squad. So the short week thing, maybe they come in on a Sunday when they normally have that off. Maybe they'll get a Saturday off instead, but just that's how I would imagine they'll do it either way. They'll just fly out on a Thursday. They'll be in action on a Friday. And I think it's nice that they get an extra day of rest until their game the following week against TCU, because as you're just getting back in the flow off a bye week, and just after a game in general, the physicality adds up. Guys get hurt, banged up, so it gives them the extra time to get back. So I don't think, even though it's a short week, it'll be too crazy for Utah coming off the bye, right, Ethan?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think because it comes off the bye, I don't imagine they'll treat the week that much differently. I think that the prep remains the same. I think it'll be nice for them to have the week off. I mean, it has been nice for them to have the week off, and to just kind of, correct some stuff, reassess, see where they're at, hopefully have a clearer picture of who's playing quarterback, giving Cam Rising the 2 extra weeks, potentially internally they know whether or not he's going to play. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. You never really know. But I do think that just having the extra week off is nice for the coaching staff. It's nice for the players just to be able to prep for this. And then a night game on Friday, weird things can happen, especially on the road. You never know. But
an improved Sun Devils team too, not the one that Utah would always bulldoze. We'll talk about them more this week, but this is a better Arizona State team than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but I think Utah should be able to go down there and execute better than they did last week and get a win. But like I said, Friday night game, things get weird.
They can. They very much can. And we're just glad to have football back. It was a long weekend last weekend, not having Utah football. It felt weird not being able to tune in and watch Utah. But you know what, Ethan? I'm excited because not only soon on my weekends am I going to tune in and be able to watch Utah football, but I'm going to be able to watch the Utah men's and women's basketball programs. As we sit here about a month out, got to see the teams practice. The media members were there, got some quotes and everything from it. What was your biggest takeaways from kind of that first opportunity we got to hear from Craig Smith about the 2024 run in Utes, as well as what Coach Lynn Roberts and the women's basketball team will be doing this year?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start on the men's side. I think, it's going to be an interesting, year for Utah. I think that they have had a ton of turnover. I mean, I don't think they have had a ton of turnover. There's 10 new players coming into the roster. They had a bunch of graduations, bunch of transfers last year, and they're playing in a new conference. So I think this is uncharted waters for this team. They're going to have to figure out a plan and figure it out quickly. The starting five appears to be relatively up in the air. I think that there's going to be a pretty solid battle over the next couple of weeks, and we'll see what Craig Smith decides to go with for his starting five. I think Gabe Madsen's going to be in there, and outside of that, I think that the rest of the spots are probably up for grabs. I guess we'll see. But, I think it's just going to be a lot of getting used to the new faces, learning how to play together, and figuring out where everybody best fits in the lineup, and just kind of seeing what they can do as they head into this new conference against a bunch of really good teams.
Yep. And the one thing you talked about, the turnover, I was scrolling on X the other day, and I saw Brandon Carlson in his Raptors jersey.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a 2-way contract there. I was like, wow, that is wild. No Davon Smith. Raleigh Wooster's gone as well. It really is no Keba Keita. We don't need to talk about where he went, but like it's just it's a whole new look for the Utes. But how about the women's team, right? You lose Alyssa Peely. Shout out to what she's been able to do with the Minnesota Lynx team. I know she hasn't been playing in the playoffs as much when I've been checking, but still cool for her to be a part of that success. But Jenna Johnson, Gianna Neepkins is coming back. What are your thoughts on the Utah women's basketball team?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be about who can replace Alyssa Peely's impact and what the internal development looks like, right? Because they have not nearly as much of a turnover for that roster. I think the biggest piece is just going to be having Gianna Neepkins back healthy because she was clearly the second option for the Utes last year. And her going down with injury early in the season, I think really put a lot of pressure on Alyssa Peely to be like a go-to scorer every night, and teams could just kind of load up on her and double her and do whatever they wanted. And Utah didn't really have anybody else to relieve that pressure. So I think Neepkins being a creator at the guard spot is going to be really big for them. Hopefully she's fully healthy at this point, and we'll see kind of what she can do as the number one option heading into the season. And just who can progress, who can make a jump, right? They had a few highly recruited freshmen last year. They're bringing in a few more freshmen this year. Don't expect too many of them to play a ton of minutes, but if they can find like kind of a diamond in the rough or one of their higher ranked recruits can kind of make a jump and become a productive player for them to really fill that gap that's left by Peely's graduation, that's going to be the big thing to watch, I think.
Ethan, that was a fantastic breakdown of both the men's and women's basketball programs. And if people would like to read about or hear your thoughts on those programs, as well as a little bit more on the football program, where should they head over to?
UteZone.com. I just had a piece go up yesterday about the Utes roster and on the men's side, a breakdown of the team and kind of the new faces and what the roster is going to look like. I was writing about the big men first, the centers and the big power forwards, and I'm going to be doing a piece on the guards and the wings coming up. I'd like to get a similar piece about the women's team up in the next few weeks as well before the season goes up, so you can look out for that. UteZone.com. It's all there, baby.
Ethan, thank you for joining me. A lot of fun, man.
Of course.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. It's game week once again. We're going to be talking about the Sun Devils. We'll do our crossover show with Richie Bradshaw, the host of Locked On ASU. Talk about this Arizona State team, what they do well. That's what we'll be breaking down on the show. So make sure you guys check us out and hope you all have a fantastic Monday.